Hi there, and welcome to The Main Idea. I am Jen David Lang. My passion is helping school leaders learn. I read lots of education and leadership books, and I save you time by summarizing only the most compelling and impactful books for you. This year, in the May edition of The Main Idea, I am suggesting that leaders give teachers 4 choices for books to read over the summer and let them choose which to read, and you buy the books. And then I share a simple format to have groups of teachers discuss and implement what they've learned in the new school year. So lately, I am hearing school leaders in my mastermind groups talk about their teachers being beaten down by student behavioral issues. They're concerned about an increase in dealing with what we often call the challenging student behaviors. And this increase seems particularly apparent since the pandemic. And not only is it troubling for students, but it's impacting the teachers in our schools as well. Leaders and teachers want a resource to help them better understand and manage these student behaviors, preferably in a more preventative and kind-hearted way. And so that's why I was so excited to come across the book From Behaving to Belonging, The Inclusive Art of Supporting Students Who Challenge Us by Julie Causton and Kate MacLeod. And yes, this is one of the 4 books I suggest leaders provide as an option for teacher summer reading. And by the way, I'll list those 4 books in the show notes if you want to see. And can I just say that this is a lovely book. Just reading it helped me feel rejuvenated myself. It has such a positive and loving approach to supporting students. So I'm really excited today to have both authors, Julie and Kate, here. And just a brief intro. Dr. Julie Causton began as an educator and then spent 14 years as a tenured professor at Syracuse University. In 2012, she founded Inclusive Schooling, which is a company devoted to delivering PD, which transforms schools and lives. She's also a best-selling author, an inspiring speaker, and an inclusion advocate. And Dr. Kate MacLeod began her education career as a dual certified special education and high school English teacher in New York City at my daughter's high school, Edward R. Murrow in Brooklyn. Had to give that a shout out. She's an innovative, inclusive educator, researcher, and author committed to creating schools where every student belongs. And Kate's also a tenured faculty member at the University of Maine at Farmington and the director of the Maine State Inclusive Education Project. Clearly, both of you are deeply committed and passionate about inclusive education, and I want to welcome both of you to the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you, Jen. We're so excited to be here and talking to this important group of folks.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jen. It's great to be here.
I'm glad you're here. Let's just start with the basics. So this book, From Behaving to Belonging, why did you write it? Who's it for? And what problem is it designed to solve?
Great. So I'll jump in, Kate, to start, and then you can add.
Yeah.
We wrote it because we were really tired of seeing traditional remove and remediate practices and lots of practices that we found to be harmful for kids in schools around behavior. And we found that students who had challenging behavior were the most vulnerable to these specific kinds of removal, exclusion, and worse. And so what we decided to do was to create a book to say, okay, we understand that these, lots of us have been trained in ways that are problematic around behavior, and we've got to use an entirely different approach. So this work is really about the long game of love and connection and trust. And when Kate and I have been working in schools for 25 plus years, it's the only thing we've found that works for kids with challenging behavior, very extremely challenging behavior, is love, connection, support, guidance, and not punishment and not reward.
That's right. And I think, Julie, too, when we think about approaching it from love and this heart set mindset of relationship-based work, it also, we wrote it for educators to feel like when we do this work, our lives and our work is more fulfilling and more connected. And so there's more motivation to go and do this really important advocacy for changing some of these harmful practices and outdated practices.
And you both brought up love, and it's at the very beginning of the book. It definitely struck me from the very beginning that you invite teachers to support the students they find to be challenging from a place of love. And I don't know if that scares people, turns people off, welcomes them in. I'm not sure, but I was struck by it when I was a teacher. I definitely did love my students. Did I have some challenging ones? Of course. Did I always love them? I cannot say that I did. So at least in the book, you show us how to develop a bit of a practice of love. I appreciated that. But you
Mm.
also share some research that there is a strong connection between love and compassion and the impact that has on the human mind and body, and that it's a positive one. So I appreciate that you took the scientific approach to what some people may call is a more squishy approach. Do you want to say anything else about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's fun about this book and people who've read it and shared with us their thoughts, they continually say, this is how I've always felt, but I've been
Yes.
too afraid to behave in these ways. I've been too afraid because I've had to have this system of punishment and this system in place where I have to put kids' names on the board or move their clips down or their dojo systems or whatever. And they just kind of became steeped in a system that doesn't align with who they are.
Mm.
And that, so ever since we've been talking with folks that have read it, we've also gone down a really deep rabbit hole around brain research to show that the last 25 years we've learned a lot more about the human brain. And it turns out that these strategies and practices are the only thing that change behavior for the better. We can get compliance temporarily, but this is long-term approaches to creating bonds, connections, and students that you're happy to work with in school or more happy to work with every day in school.
Yeah, it's reminding me of two quotes. One, Rita Pearson, right? That
Yep.
you students can only learn from a teacher where they feel that love. And more recently, Elena Aguilar in a book about coaching said that teachers can't learn from someone who thinks they suck. And it's sort of the other side of the coin of what you're talking about. And you do share a story of a newer teacher who once he learned about his student, he said, then they're nearly impossible not to love, right? Once I know about them, right?
That's
Um,
right.
so any reason this approach is particularly important right now?
You want to address that, Kate?
Well, I mean, I think that this particular approach is important and has been important ever since we have been segregating and separating students that have challenging behaviors. And we know that we continue to do so. And we know that, like you said, the idea that approaching with love is more aligned to what we want, Julie, and what educators join the field to do. And we've seen such a rise in educators that we work with in schools across the country, really feeling like, oh my gosh, behaviors are at crisis level. And so if we can bring the work back to this love and this connection and these strategies that are grounded in this brain research and the knowing that compassion and connection is the only way forward, if not now, when?
Yeah, no, it's great. And yeah, and for leaders who are listening, whether you're listening for with teachers in mind or just for yourself as you think about, the approach and the philosophy your school takes, I think it's a really important book. And as most of my listeners know, I like to summarize things. So I'm going to sort of pull out three major areas of the book that I found very helpful. And there are tons of practical, very practical suggestions within each section. So the first part I saw in the book was the stuff the teacher has control over. And that's the teacher's own mindset and the teacher's self-care.
Mm.
And then I sort of saw a middle part, which is about what teachers can do preventatively in their classrooms to support students who challenge us before the yelling, the blow up, whatever it is. And then the third part is yes, in the moment, even when we do our best, students have a lot they're struggling with. And so, what are some strategies? What can you do on the spot when a student is experiencing some of these behaviors? So, if that's okay with you, can we jump in by section?
Yeah, sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
and start with the first one, which is the part that teachers have control over, and that is their mindset and their self-care. And I have to say, I don't think I've ever been to any PD or anything about, what we would historically call discipline, where we started with teacher mindset. So I love that you start with that. I think it's chapter 1.
Mhm.
Um, what can you tell us about teacher mindset? What needs to change? And is there any way that as leaders we can support a different type of teacher mindset that would be helpful?
Mm.
I think one of the most positive steps that anyone can take when dealing with someone who challenges them is to reframe that human being. So to change, restore, we say in the book, restory, reframe, rework the narrative that has come to them. So many of us will, as educators, receive a big pile of papers on their desk and they'll read someone's IEPs and they threw a desk in fourth grade and they kicked someone and it's all documented. And I think a lot about that related to humans. Imagine Jen. Now, I just met Jen today, but imagine Jen that instead of getting to hear about all the awesome work you're doing, I instead got a long written list of all the mistakes you've made, all the times you're not proud
Long
of.
list. Yeah.
It would be a long list for any one of us. And yet, in the field of special education, we're constantly looking at people's paperwork, their data, all the times they lost their shit, really, is what it is. And it's written down and it's detailed and it's really it becomes the narrative of the human.
Mhm.
And so, what Kate and I suggest related to mindset is that we stop looking at students through this lens of negativity or deficits or challenges, but you flip the script and you start to look at all humans through their gifts, through their strengths, through their talents, and through their abilities. And when you just literally you rewrite the story of this kid. And we do mind maps. Kate and I do mind maps with teachers a lot where we'll put the student in the center and write the words that come to mind first and then cross out those words and add a bunch of new words that are still true about this human,
Mhm.
but they're more accurate because I can imagine, Jen, I could describe you in both negative and positive ways.
Yeah.
If I talked to one of your closest friends, they could give me a few things, right? And that's what we've got to stop doing is that focus on the negative and change our mindsets to think about what's possible for this human.
But
That's
I
one.
love, Julie, what you just did, but giving that example of like with me, right, putting me in the position of being that challenging student, right, of what it's
Right.
like if you started this conversation knowing about that. Throughout the book, I want the listeners to know the two of you weave in exercises that as leaders you could use to help teachers shift their mindset. So I want to give one of the examples from the book that I liked. I think I liked all of them. But
Yeah.
there's one on page 20 where you list challenging behaviors and you ask teachers, right? So imagine principals at your
Mm.
next staff meeting, put
Mhm.
a list of challenging behaviors up on a screen and ask teachers to think about every one of those behaviors they have engaged in. So I'm going to give our listeners a list of this, and I know I've engaged in them. So listen up, school leaders. Have you ever engaged in any of these behaviors? Yelling, fighting, throwing items, avoiding work, storming out of the room, shutting down or closing off, challenging authority, talking back, swearing, talking out of turn, talking to your neighbor when you should be listening to the speaker, right? So, listeners, have you ever engaged in any of those? And
No.
now, you know what
Nobody,
the
not a single
authors
one.
say. You are all perfectly human and likely trying to communicate something, right? Whether the PD was boring, that's why you were talking to your neighbor, or it wasn't differentiated and you already learned this skill, right?
Right.
So that's another big theme in the book that student
Yes.
behavior is communication. But by doing that little exercise and having our teachers or our leaders see that we all, at certain points in our lives, for a reason, have engaged in these behaviors, it helps to shift your mindset when a student is engaging in that in your class. So I loved those little exercises in the book, and I just wanted to throw that
Mhm.
one out.
Yeah, and I love that you brought that up too, Jen, because I think when Julie and I, when we were writing this book and when we're working with leaders or educators, we always want to be able to connect, what's going on for what teachers are experiencing and how does that impact the ways they support their learners. And so, you talked about that, like what do we need to have educators know to shift a mindset to, really thinking about what are you grateful for? How can you find the moments of joy and love and care in your day-to-day work with learners? Because we can find that with learners with and without challenging behaviors. And that's what, when they have challenging behaviors, as Julie said, like those learners are the most vulnerable. And so those are the ones we should really spend the most time working toward like what beautiful strengths do they have. And so throughout the book too we do have a lot of different activities like thinking about how educators can focus on their mindsets and their gratitude and their self-care and not self-care in the way that feels inauthentic, but really in a way, and Julie has helped me with this as a friend as well as colleague, just to really identify what does it mean to take care of yourself and put yourself in a place that you can support your learners in really powerful ways.
So it sounds like you already segued us into this self-care idea. And I know
Oh,
leaders have heard a lot about self-care since the
mm.
pandemic, during the pandemic, but can you connect more concretely? What is the connection between teacher or educator self-care and working with students who challenge us? Can you make that connection a
Yeah.
little clearer? Yeah.
I'll just start with the analogy that many of us have heard, which is you cannot pour from an empty cup, right? And so, what we're seeing, and we've all described it a couple different ways, a couple different times today, even, is educators who are overwhelmed, underwater, very stressed out. And if we think about the human brain, probably all of you know this, but I'm just going to give you a teeny reminder that the prefrontal cortex, the front of your brain, is when you can make good decisions, you can be your best self, you can be empathetic, you can understand stuff, all that stuff. The good stuff happens in the front of your brain. Unfortunately, stressors tend to flip people's lids and get them into fight, flight, freeze, or faint. And so, all humans, even you listeners who even are just driving to work, maybe right now, probably lost it over your dog barking, your partner saying something. You've already struggled to keep yourself in your prefrontal cortex. Now, what we've got to remember is adult humans are no different than children, except that adults have more strategies
Hopefully
and
more strategies.
hopefully a better developed brain. But all that to be said, we can't pretend that we also don't sometimes have really challenging behaviors. And we can't put on a white lab coat and look at these kids like, I don't even understand where it's coming from. We all understand it's coming from overstressed systems. And the response to that is not to add punishment, it's to constantly be thinking about stress levels of students and teachers and constantly and purposefully reducing those stress levels with all the things that we mention in the book.
And we're going to get back to this in the third part, which is what do you
Okay.
do in the moment, right? When
Yeah.
a student is throwing over a desk. And even if you tune out for all the science and the brain science, which I love and I appreciate, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, if I am stressed out and I haven't slept well and I didn't remember to pack a lunch and then a kid throws over a desk in my classroom, I'm obviously not going to react as my best self. So, but we'll get to that. I want to hit the
Mm.
preventative stuff first. And so you have a number of chapters on the preventative stuff. But before we get to the preventative stuff, you talk about and you mentioned this earlier, some of the problems we have with the traditional ways we deal with student behavior, particularly by segregating, that was the word you used, students in a different classroom, and you give an anecdote and you don't have to share about the anecdote, but a story of fictitious name, Kayvon, who's been educated for 6 years from kindergarten through fifth grade in separate classrooms with students who are considered to have significant behavioral challenges, right? And Kayvon is the type of kid who's yelling, I hate this stupid class. I'm just one of the stupid kids. So can you either use the story or explain what are some of the problems? Shouldn't we put kids together who are struggling in separate classrooms? What are the problems with that?
Problems with that are significant, pervasive. I mean, I just taught, like, just like I'll be on an airplane and I'll be sitting next to someone who's an engineer. And I'll say, we'll be chatting. They'll usually be reading what I'm looking at or something, and we'll be chatting about the work. And at some point, I ask this question, which is like, does it make any sense at all to put all the children who struggle the most with behavior in a single room? And the person's like, no, that's a terrible plan. Right. Why would it be terrible? Well, because they're going to feed off of each other, because they're going to learn the worst behaviors. Because you can ask anybody who's not in education and they'd be like, that's, and then I'll go, no, here's the plan. We're going to hire a brand new teacher and we're going to put them in that room. And they're going to, just wish them luck and pat them on the back. And it, it makes no sense for about 1,000 reasons. And
Yeah.
Kate and I would say, Kate and I have spent our entire careers saying that we have to stop segregating kids by their struggles
Yeah.
because we create these places and spaces where they don't belong. And in the story of Kayvon, the actual thing that worked for him was putting him back into a general ed classroom. And I don't mean it sort of worked. I mean, this kid thrived. Sixth grade, seventh grade, eighth grade, all the way on. Incredibly bright student who thrived as soon as we stopped putting him in a room with other children who struggle. And so Kate and I aren't just talking about Kayvon, we're talking about dismantling classrooms for students with challenging behavior very purposely.
And Julie, just as you're saying that, we're not just talking about Kavan, we're not just talking about dismantling systems. It's like his story is the rule and not the exception. Like again and again and again, when we have learners that are um, denied access to a sense of belonging, to equitable opportunities, to succeed, to connect, to have a relationship with their peers, and to not be, and as you said, Julie, right, the kid with all the other kids with challenging behaviors,
Right.
they thrive.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, and you've seen it, and there's research. I want to point out that I was laughing not at the content, but the idea that when Julie gets on a plane,
Yes.
her question for conversation isn't
Oh,
where are you going?
no,
It's what do you think about having students in separate class? So that's why I was laughing. I was like, oh, okay, I need a
Mhm.
new get to know you question if that's
you do.
Julie's.
It
Yeah.
starts out with how do you feel about segregating people based on disability? And we go from there. And it's just a
That's right.
very, it's
You probably
usually,
learned so much. And I have to, there's another activity in the book, which I really don't recommend that principals do, but I loved reading about it, where you share it's a rigged PD session on differentiation
oh my gosh.
and for a
Mhm.
group of teachers. And I don't know, like 10 of them or something have red dots under their seats. And a few minutes in, the PD facilitator, maybe it was one of you,
It was us.
says,
Yeah.
oh, it was you, Julie, look under your seats who has a red dot. Oh, okay, you all struggle with differentiation. So you go in the back of the room, you have to learn separately, right?
Mhm.
And it was fake, and it wasn't based on teachers who were struggling with differentiation and the impact on the people. It reminded me of the blue eyes green eyes video.
Yes.
Maybe you don't know that,
Yes.
but
Yes.
the teachers who remained felt so superior, and the teachers who were pulled over, I underlined some of the words, they felt devastated to think that their administrator thought that of them. They felt pissed that they missed the content while they were away. They were ashamed walking to the back. The incredible, and these are adults who have a much stronger sense of self-concept. So anyway, I digress, but yes, so clearly there's problems with the way we currently in many of our schools, not all, address these types of student behaviors. So the first thing is for teachers to put preventative practices in place. And you have about a gazillion suggestions, but I don't know if you want to pick a few or if you want me to jog your memory and note a few or
Yeah. Jog our
Yeah,
memory.
jog our
And
memories. I mean, we
sure.
do talk about preventative structures and practices all day long, but
Yeah, yeah. You talk about an I am Norm campaign, and this isn't Norm from Cheers. This is Norm, as in the norm. Can you talk about what is the I am Norm campaign in your school?
yep.
sure. Yeah. And I think you can take it in any phrase or how you want to think about it, but where everybody gets to share something beautiful about their identity, and you can go around and you can have students and staff and educators and leaders record, write little signs up, and then you kind of compile it all together to create a way where we're really honoring all of the beautiful diversity within a school community, including disability, including different, cultures and race and identity and family structures and all sorts of different pieces that we can bring to the table to create this understanding of who is norm.
Right, who's normal, and the idea that that also impacts student mindset, right? Because what are the students thinking when a student is yelling, or right? So to help students with the mindset that there isn't this idea of normal, there isn't normal, and behavior is communication, and what's going on is that we have trouble with that idea that there are many more behaviors and aspects of people that are normal than we've been taught to believe in our media and etc.
That's right.
Another area, so you talk about teachers focusing on relationships, as much as content, if not more. And you just, and often we see at the beginning of the year, teachers do sort of get to know you, but you're talking about throughout the year, like check-ins or fist to fives. I don't know. Do you want to share one of these
Sure.
ideas to?
Yeah, one of my favorite is a sticky note strategy. And this is something that we used with a teacher that was just absolutely done with the kid. And she was like, essentially, this kid doesn't belong here. It's not going to be okay. And Kate and I came in as a team to support. And one of the things that we talked about was their relationship. And the teacher said that, what relationship? This kid hates me. I don't like this kid. It's clear. You can watch it happen from the beginning to the end. So we just tried this strategy out and we tried it for a week. And it was simply that the teacher writes a kind, positive, specific note to the child and puts it in, has the kid put it in their pocket and not read it till they get home every day, no matter what happened. So, did the kid flip a desk? Okay, maybe. But did the kid also hold the door open for all the kids when they were coming in for recess? And so she didn't just say, like, you held the door, whatever. She would say, I see how compassionate you are. I see how kind you are. I see your empathy for others. And it was this. So she ended up needing bigger sticky notes, but that was a whole different story. And when he got off the bus every day, his job was to read that note to his grandmother who picked him up off the bus.
Oh,
And so for 1 week, she tried that. When Kate and I came back in a week, we didn't know what we were going to get. It may or may not have worked.
yeah.
She was crying and she said, I've never done anything more powerful. This kid is walking in, hugging me. He's wondering what my note's going to say today. And she's like, I can't wait to find out. And it's just, those are the kinds of strategies. We're moving away
Yeah.
from taking a bunch of data on what's wrong with this kid.
Yeah.
And what we ask people to take data on is when are they successful?
Yeah. And can I say two things? One, I said that I felt this. I felt rejuvenated reading this book. It's
Mhm.
hard not to, you just shared that strategy with me, and I thought that as an educator, right,
Yeah.
that it's not just for the students, it's for us too. We want to feel better about our jobs and our students and our approaches. Like you said, we want it to align. Most people did not enter the field of education to punish kids, right?
Right.
We need to get back to that alignment between our original values that from when we first entered the field. And
Yeah.
in your book, you do say this is a longer process, but some of the strategies don't take that much time,
Oh,
So
yeah.
like you just shared, or, I've never heard of this. We've all heard of the turn and talk, the turn and celebrate, right? Give your kids a moment instead of turning and talking about the novel or the math problem, celebrate something about each other or yourselves. We've all heard about the teacher at the door who welcomes kids in, but you turn that into a gratitude practice by having the teacher at the door say to the students how grateful they are that the students are there, modeling gratitude and feeling gratitude themselves. So some of the practices, it's not all like long-term dismantle systems. Some of it is
Mhm.
some quick strategies. So
That's great.
I do want to get into, because there's definitely an important structure you do have in the book called heartfelt problem solving. And you really want teachers and schools to move away from compliance and control when it comes to addressing behavior and instead bring the students in. And so you developed a four-step heartfelt problem solving approach when something triggers students. So I don't know if you could describe these 4 steps. Could one of you do that? What they involve?
Sure.
Yeah, sure.
I
Julie, you
just
want
want
to
to,
start?
yeah, I kind of want to, I need to compare it in your heads right now, which is usually there'll be a kid who's really, really struggling and having all sorts of wild behavior. And then a team of adult humans, we all sit together and we brainstorm and create some sort of behavior program. And we do it without the input of the child. And then we start with them and then we take data on it. And then we find out it didn't work to begin with. And so we waste a lot of time and energy
Mhm.
in rooms around tables talking about kids, not talking with kids. So,
Mm.
one of the first and most important things you already mentioned, Jen, is that we invite students into this problem solving approach.
Mhm.
And they are not the problem, but we're going to learn what the problem is together. And so, Kate, you want to start with the first step or
Yeah, and
the
so
4 steps?
once we have that student and that learner, and we also gather other people who, and I know we talked about this idea of love, but like we do gather other people that love and care about the students. So it might be the educators that are working with them primarily, but then it might also be a dear friend and or the grandmother that he's reading his note to. And so we really think about this circle of support that we're gathering for this stepwise process. And the first thing that we do is we discover strengths. Because as Julie also noted, that sometimes like we're coming with this long rap sheet, and instead let's start with all of the successes and strengths that we are going to then build on. Like this strength-based, asset-based approach that we want to do everything in in those proactive moments
Like that
for.
mind map
And
that you were talking about, Kate.
just
Yeah.
like that mind
Yeah.
map,
Sure.
exactly. So we
Okay.
start with the strengths and we're really thinking about what's working well, in the specific environment. And we really also, as Julie said, the student is not the problem. So we look at everything around the student, what's going on in the environment, what's going on with the materials, what's going on with the peer relationships, with the relationships with teachers. We're really focusing on all of these things as we think about
Is
what
that step
strengths,
two, the discovering challenges to look at the environment, or is that a yeah? Okay, so step one, discovering strengths. Step
strengths.
two, discovering challenges, and then step three, dreaming and designing for increased belonging. What does that look like?
Mm.
So after we've created the challenge, right? And so we often come in thinking it's one thing. So all the adults usually think the problem is this kid is being disrespectful. The problem is this kid is being unmotivated. The problem is this kid is being blah, blah, blah. And so what Kate said is we're reframing all of that to say, what are their strengths, gifts, talents, abilities? Then we get to, well, what is the problem? And the only person that really we can hear from the problem is the student. And they will share some of the if this place and space is warm and welcoming and celebratory of their strengths, we start to already hear from the student talking about what is the challenge. And I'll use, Kate, I don't remember if we write about this, but Michael, I'm thinking about Michael
Mm.
as a student who had his hoodie up all day, head down, especially science, especially first period. He hated this class. And when we asked him what was wrong, what was the challenge? What challenge are we solving? He said, I'll tell you one challenge, that room stinks. And we're like, what do you, and the teacher's like, no, totally, that room, it does, it reeks in that room. And we're like, well, like what? What are you talking about? And so we start to dream and design. And dreaming and designing is you go, okay, let's imagine that that problem weren't there. What
Right.
would it smell like, Michael? And
Mm.
he goes, freshly baked bread.
Ah,
And we're
I
like,
would like that.
right. So we're like freshly baked bread. Okay. We also did a bunch of dreaming, a bunch of designing, a bunch of thinking. But later you go to create a success plan. And what you do is you select the thing that most people like in the room,
Yeah.
especially the student, Michael, in this case. And he said, I'm thinking of the bread strategy. I think that's what we need. So we're not kidding. The science teacher goes, I just got married and I have a bread maker in our garage that's collecting dust. What if we made bread first period? What if we made bread the night before? Because that's how bread makers work. Michael, would you help me do that at the end of the day and we could serve it in the morning? You guys, if Kate and I walk into the science classroom, the kid's hood is off. The kid is serving bread and butter and jam. Some mom sent in some jam. It's like the stone soup story.
Yeah.
Everybody started to bring in things. And this kid kicks off science with a role, with a responsibility, feeling important. One
Yeah.
of the other problems is he's hungry at science time.
Yeah.
And guess what? So were all the other kids. They had to get more bread makers. The
Yeah.
point being, we have to stop using the same terrible strategies
Yeah.
that we use in schools.
Right.
We have to get much more creative. So it can't be removal, remediation, suspension, detention, all the things we know that don't work and
Yeah.
actually create a break in our trust.
Yeah.
We have to get more creative and we
Yeah.
have to start to bring in bread makers.
And I love that, for a few reasons, but one, that's one of the things we're teaching kids to problem solve. And I don't mean the
Right.
quadratic equation, but in life, right? Our kids become adults who have problems and they need to learn how do you come together. And here's a four-step process for them when they're 18 and 25 and 50, right? I
That's
love
right.
that. And I love the philosophy that it rests on, that I think you have four foundational beliefs that put the student at the center of
Mm.
problem solving. Let's see behaviors communication, right? So Michael was communicating that the room smelled, right?
Yep.
Maybe he's a migrainer, like me, and that's a bigger
Yeah.
deal than you think.
Mhm.
Three, recognizing the problem isn't within the student, but in the sort of the way we approach it, right? So we were approaching the hoodie, but we should have been approaching his discomfort with the smell or the problem with the room. And then
Mhm.
finally, this I love. And you can use this as a litmus test, I think, for any problem solving approach that you have. Does the solution increase the student's acceptance, belonging, and connection to the community, the ABC? So if you have a challenging student in your school, in your classroom, is the way you're going about it increasing that student's acceptance, belonging, and connection to community? Certainly putting them in a separate classroom doesn't meet the ABC test. So we're going on for long, and I know leaders are busy. So I
Mm,
just do want to hit the
mm,
last one.
mm,
So number three, right? When teachers are on the spot, and even, Michael on a bad day, goes back to his hoodie or whatever and gets upset and yells at a student, right? So on the spot, do you have a few tips for teachers after they've done the preventative, the self-care, making sure that they've, slept and eaten and you've worked on their mindset? So what in the moment, if I am a teacher, do you recommend that I do if there's
Mm.
a challenging student behavior?
Mm.
I'm going to use the word co-regulate.
Mm.
And so what that means is, and a lot of people talk about co-regulation, but they don't know what it means.
Mm-hmm.
And it means essentially letting a student borrow your calm.
Mm.
So being next to, being by, being supportive, saying something. Let's imagine the kid just told you to F off, right? You know, something like that. And to say to them, I'm here to support you, or it's going to be okay, or I'm right here with you. And you, if you know about mirror neurons, you know that when I calm my voice, my body, my posture, my tone, everything about what's happening in the moment, that helps because mirror neurons, our bodies start to de escalate. And so, so much about it is not increasing volume, not increasing word count, not increasing any of it. It's actually reducing stressors in the moment until the kid can get into their prefrontal cortex long enough that later we can have a conversation about it.
That's
That's
right.
great. And
Yeah.
everybody could practice that at home if you have your own children or a partner or a roommate, right? We all have people who blow up at us. And can you practice that pause where you speak in a calm voice? I love that. Um,
Yeah.
what else in that moment? What else do you suggest?
Connection, after you've practiced that pause, you connect, they need to see that you care about them and that you are there with them, even if they've just told you to F off, for example, or destroyed the classroom,
Mhm.
because they need to feel safe and secure, and you are the person that can help them to do that.
And that's amazing. And you definitely describe in the book there is a teacher, and so people can read, what that looks like.
Mhm.
And it's amazing when you are calm and using a calm voice and you're connecting, part of what you have to do as a teacher is in your head too, because most of us want to act out of anger, right? I've heard that anger is the easiest emotion. I don't know if that's true. I'm an educator, not a psychologist, but I've heard that. And so how do I as the teacher separate myself from the anger so I don't respond from a place of anger? And you say in the book, it's okay, you can be angry at the student, but that's not going to be beneficial to respond that way. And also, if we've done all these exercises to know about our students and build that relationship, can I call to mind, some of the more positive attributes or understanding, the last time I told someone to F off, right?
That's right. That's
That's
right.
right.
Yeah, and you do
Yeah.
end with the idea of a private conversation,
Mm.
whether that's outside of the classroom or whispering, but we really want to make sure that our students maintain their dignity, just like we would want someone, for us to do the
Mhm.
same thing. And I
That's right.
appreciate that your approach really emphasizes, love, patience, persistence, and a reminder that student behavior is communication for later when you could go through those 4 steps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, it's lovely. There's a lot about this book um, to take away from. So if I could ask one of you, just as sort of a recap, I like to sort of end with main ideas. If one of
Mm.
you could, in a sentence, give us the main idea of your book, if one of you could give us a simple action that a leader could take to sort of inspire a whole movement toward more inclusive culture, and then one other resource on this book. So would someone start with the main idea of the book? Could you give it to us?
Main idea. One sentence, Julie. What do you think?
Or
I would,
two?
yeah, I would say we've been wrong about belonging,
Mm.
and it's essential to belong in order to behave in ways that are pro-social. And so we often take belonging off the table first, like you're out of here, you go down to the office, you leave, you blah, blah, blah. And so exclusionary practices, you said one sentence. So belonging is not extra, it's actually the foundation of relationship and good behavior.
Great. Wow. Thank you. And how
Mm.
about one action to start for a leader to begin to build this inclusive culture in their building?
I mean, we think that if you take this book and have a book study and gather your educators and your staff, including your paraprofessionals, and really think about what this looks like, and spend meaningful time cultivating community and care with the staff as well to reframe and to understand that behavior is communication and to understand that belonging is the foundation. We think that it will ripple out.
Wonderful.
And then, Julie, we also have
Finally,
another, I was like, one more resource, right?
yeah, resource for
Yeah,
listeners.
resource. So besides Kate saying you need to do this book, Behaving to Belonging, as a book study in your whole school. So that's step one. There's a second step, which is if you go to inclusiveschooling.com, we have something called Behavior 360. And we haven't talked about it all today, but it's professional development all around these big ideas. And so it's actually something that's ready to go for districts to take and use. So if you're interested in something that's bigger, it's called Behavior 360, and it's pretty amazing.
And did you also have a book that's specifically for leaders that you wanted to mention?
Oh,
Yes.
yes. Yeah. And so if you are listening to us and you're thinking, I do want to change my outdated systems, we don't want to have segregated classrooms, we do want everybody to collaborate for belonging, you should get our book, The Way to Inclusion: How Leaders Create Schools Where Every Student Belongs.
Great. Thank you. And some websites or more information if people want to learn more about both of you and your work.
You can find me at inclusiveschooling.com. And Kate, do you want to
And
share?
sure. And you can find me at the University of Maine Farmington website, and you can find my email there and connect with me there.
Great. That sounds good. And if it's okay, I'll put it in the chat if you would like to. Thank you both for taking the time to talk with me today. I know you're both busy, so thank you so much. Thank you to the listeners. You're busy as well. So I hope that you'll share this conversation with other people who are working to make their schools more inclusive and loving as well. If you have colleagues who want to increase the belonging at their school. And yeah, so I will be back in 2 weeks. Until then, learn more, lead better. Thanks again.
Thank you.
So much.